All right, Stephen, we talked about having a closer look at a big story coming out of Intel. So they're going to be spinning off their Programmable Solutions Group as an independent business. They're aiming to have an IPO for PSG in about 2 to 3 years. Now, PSG is led by Intel's current data center and AI group EVP, Sandra Rivera, who's someone you're very familiar with. They're going to operate independently as part of Intel's broader restructuring efforts. Despite PSG's past financial success, Intel believes that the shift will enable more agility and growth, targeting markets beyond just the data center. The goal is to retain majority ownership while allowing PSG to operate autonomously within the competitive FPGA market, similar to the approach that Intel took with Mobileye last year. So, Stephen, hearing that Intel's spinning off a very big, profitable part of their business, what does that mean for the future here?
Yeah, this is an interesting story because well, first off, because it reveals what Intel's overall strategy is. And I think I'll let you talk to that, Tom. But also because it shows a recognition that maybe FPGAs and CPUs and accelerators, maybe they are different animals and need to be treated differently. So, first off, let me kind of give you a little bit of background here. So, this is all about FPGAs. So back in 2015, Intel acquired Altera, which was probably the leading company in the FPGA space. And what is an FPGA? Well, it's a field programmable gate array, but you should think of it as basically sort of soft hardware. The idea is that it is a CPU, a chip, just like any other, except that you can program it and dynamically reconfigure it on the fly to do some very cool things. FPGAs are used all over the place, especially in prototypes, but even in production hardware. And what you can do is basically you can download a physical configuration to that chip, and then that chip can do what it's supposed to do. So, for example, a lot of FPGAs are running a soft ARM core. That's one of the things that people put in FPGAs. A lot of them also run things like special purpose accelerators and processors. And those, of course, are really nice to have in hardware. But what if your programs change? What if your needs change? Well, the cool thing with an FPGA is you can just download a new configuration using a language called HDL. And that language can basically create a virtual ASIC that can do things. One of my favorite uses of FPGAs is in retro computing. Just Google that, you'll see it. Now, what's going on here, though, is that Intel had put this FPGA business alongside their Xeon data center processors, as well as their AI acceleration, which makes a lot of sense. That actually mirrors how AMD is treating their Xilinx acquisition, for example. And in having all of this stuff together, it means that Intel could put together a sort of an overall accelerated compute offering that spans all the way from CPU to GPU to AI, IPU, XPU, I don't know what you want to call it, to FPGA. The problem is that FPGAs really are different animals. And as I just mentioned, FPGAs have lots of markets that aren't just DPU, IPU, or data center accelerator. And by having it be bound up with that data center and cloud and AI group, it makes it less friendly, I guess, to unlock some of those other values. So that's what Intel is doing. They're going to spin this out. This is very similar to what they did with Mobileye. Tom, tell us a little bit about your approach or your thoughts on Intel's strategy for dealing with this.
So you're absolutely right, Stephen, that Intel wanted to unlock value in the FPGA market. And what their hope is that by combining it with all their other assets, they were going to create this synergy. Maybe the idea is that we can reduce the amount of programming that has to happen or something along those lines. But realistically speaking, that's not the way that it occurred. So Intel's basically faced with a couple of decisions. We're going to kill the division, which they've done. They've closed off a lot of assets here recently. They can sell it off to somebody. If there's a buyer that's willing to buy off that product line, great. I mean, we've seen them do that a couple of times. But realistically speaking, something this big, they've got to spin it out. They need to recover that money. And you'll notice that they're not selling it off completely. They are retaining an ownership share. So Pat's smart enough to know that there is a future in FPGAs. It's just not inside of Intel. And so by kind of releasing this back into the market to grow and to kind of do its own exploration work without having to worry about working inside of that structure of Intel, I think that this is going to pay off in the future. And that revenue stream from being owners of the of PSG, whatever they're going to end up calling it, is going to pay off handsomely for them in the long run, because they still get all of the benefits. They just don't have to deal with all of the other, I don't know, hindrances, if you want to think about it. Because look how long it took for Intel to come up with something like the chiplet idea, where, you know, we're not going to rev every chip on a die every time we make a new processor. We can still reuse some of the old parts. Like, in, you know, thinking about it today, we're like, well, yeah, that just kind of makes sense. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, because you're Intel, and because that's not how things are done at Intel. You know, it's the old, I say it all the time, but it's that old thinking of, this is not Tom Watson's IBM. You know, well, Tom Watson's IBM would be out of business right now if they didn't transform the company. And I think that one of the most important things to make this work is that they put someone in charge of it who really gets it. And that's Sandra Rivera. And Stephen, I know that you've worked with her in the past on some things, and I thought maybe you could kind of give us a little bit of perspective about why she's the best person to do this.
Yeah, I mean, let's just start by saying that Sandra Rivera is 100% the best person to be CEO of, well, frankly, anything. In fact, I would have loved to see her as a future CEO of Intel, and that may actually happen. But given that, I think that it's important to realize, so this is someone who has been a steady hand at the data center and AI group for years. She has been with Intel, I believe, since, well, for decades, 2010, I think. And she has a background as an electrical engineer. She actually was in charge of HR for a while, but don't let that fool you. That just shows that this is someone who is a phenomenal manager, someone who really understands how to direct people. And also, this is someone who is incredibly technical and really understands the product line. As I said, you know that Intel has had some tumultuous times with their failure to deliver on process node improvements, manufacturing, delays, getting hardware to market. Throughout all of that, Sandra Rivera is somebody who I have always been able to count on to, tell it like it is, but also to be setting the best possible course given the scenarios around. And she also really understands this varied business that the Programmable Solutions Group is going to find itself in. So frankly, I can't imagine somebody who's better able to take this business, IPO it, do all the things that need to be done, both organizationally and in terms of corporate, legal, et cetera, and yet also set a marketing strategy that is going to put this thing on a good footing. And frankly, that's what I think is going to happen. Just like Mobileye, I think that this IPO will happen. I think that Intel will cash in and get some money out of it. And I think that being freed from the data center constraints that Intel places around it, I think that the future PSG, which, hey, let's just call it Altera again, will be really, really well positioned to take advantage of the need for FPGAs in the market. I also don't think that this spells the end of collaboration between Intel and this group. I mean, just like Mobileye, I think that we're going to see a brother or a cousin to Intel at the very least. But it does give the Programmable Solutions Group the ability to set its own agenda, to make its own alliances, and to really forge its way in the market. So again, this is a smart move. It shows that Gelsinger is focused on the eyes on the prize in terms of figuring out manufacturing and getting Intel back to where it needs to be as the chip-making juggernaut. And again, I can't think of anybody better to do it than Sandra Rivera.